Okay, tonight we're going to discuss the rabbinate. What is the definition of a rabbi? And this isn't just a question about the rabbinate, but as we'll see, this has to do with empowerment and has to do with the continuation and the flow of Torah throughout our generations, and how this is very connected to the time we're in now, the moments right before the coming of Mashiach. One of the most fascinating sections of the Mishnah Torah of Maimonides' work is the introduction. In the introduction to Maimonides' works, he mentions 40 generations from Moses and Moshe Rabbeinu until the time of the Talmud. 40 generations in unbroken chain from generation to generation. And it's fascinating to see how you could actually see with your eyes that there is a chain of Torah tradition. And since the time of the Talmud, there's been about also another 40 generations from then. So one of the methods of Torah transmission is discussed in the 6th Torah portion, and it's called semicha, or in today's vernacular, Rabbinical ordination. There is a conversation between God and Moses in the 6th Torah portion. Moses asks God, "What's going to happen to the Jewish people after I pass away? Why does the Jewish people be like a sheep without a shepherd?" And God says that you should take Joshua, Yehoshua, and he will continue the leadership of the Jewish people. You should put your hands upon him, and you should give him what you have. And Joshua and Yehoshua, he will continue and lead the Jewish people. After Joshua took over the leadership of the Jewish people, this continued on in the next generation. Joshua uniquely, Yehoshua uniquely, the Torah says about him, he was a man with a spirit. He was able to understand each person and relate to each person. And the tradition of the Moshe Rabbeinu got from God wasn't just the information. There was a certain authority and a certain energy in the godly quality of the Torah that Moshe received at Mount Sinai, and that is that he transmitted to Joshua. And this continues the next generation, an unbroken chain, until the time of the first temple, the time of the prophets in the first temple. They also received the information, and not just information, but the ordination, or the smicha, the laying of the hands of one generation to the next, is continued until the time of the first temple, where at that time there were still a lot of prophets, the Jewish people. Continued on to the second temple. In the second temple there were not as many prophets, but the sages at the time of the second temple, they also received rabbinical ordination, one generation to the next. They were, and this tradition, thank you so much, Roberto, passing the torch one generation to the next, continued on and on. This continued on until the time of a sage named Hillel, very famous sage. In the time of Hillel, there was a new stipulation that was made about this tradition, and that was because of the greatness of Hillel, there was a rule that was made that you could not give ordination to anyone unless the leader of the Jewish people, Hillel, agrees. So, Maimonides writes that the way that the tradition works, unlike when Moshe Rabbeinu gave Joshua this transmission of leadership, he put his hands upon him. Maimonides says not how the way it works in the subsequent generations. What happens is that you test someone and you see they're worthy of giving halachic rulings, and then you say about them, yes, you announce this person's a rabbi, this person can answer questions, and that is how the tradition is given, just by the generation before ratifying the knowledge of the sage of the next generation. So, why was this so important to have this unbroken chain from Moses of rabbinic leadership? Why was it important? What would happen if you got the information without the tradition? So there are two things that you cannot do unless you are generation to generation, an unbroken chain of rabbinic authority from Moses. There are two things the Jewish court cannot do unless they are directly in line with Moses. The first is financially binding agreements. Today, if a person wants to have a financially binding agreement according to the laws of the Torah, what they do is they go together to a Jewish court. They both agree that the Jewish court will administer their dispute, and they sign a paper binding by the state of California, or whatever state they live in, that they're going to follow the opinion of the court, and then this court has the authority, based upon the Gentile court as well, to give halachic ruling. Eldav looking at me is like, I don't think it works so symmetrically the way you're saying it, Rabbi. It's true. There are all kinds of ways that the federal court, the state court, and the Jewish courts can not flow so seamlessly. That's true, and there's all kinds of subversions, and it's not pretty out there in many instances. True, Eldad. However, what's deficient and unique about the way the Jewish court works today is that there has to be the full volition, the full agreement of both parties. However, if there were to be a court that was actually from one generation to the next in line directly from Moses, then the law would be, and the law was, that without the consent of the two parties, the court could summon them both to a discussion, to a halachic question, to their dispute to be decided and administered by the court, and the court would govern what would happen in the dispute, despite their misgivings or not. The court has authority. That's one thing you need to have a tradition in order to do. There are certain cities where the entire community has appointed a court, like in Crown Heights in Brooklyn, the Rebbe's neighborhood, where the court was voted in by the entire neighborhood, and therefore the court also has a certain power that other courts do not. But one of the unique characteristics of a court that has been appointed in an unbroken chain since Moses is they're able to administer financial agreements. A second thing is the Kiddush HaChodesh HaPiyariyah.
Excuse me, they are able to administer financial agreements?
They're able to govern financial disputes, whether the parties agree to it or not. As opposed to...
Can they get fines?
Oh, very good. Very good. That's another point. They could also give fines, that's correct. And there's also another point. Another is that nowadays we establish our court system. The dates of every month are established by a calendar that was written by another sage who was also named Hillel. He wrote a calendar for hundreds and thousands of years that has a system, and we follow that calendar. All Jewish people follow the same calendar. However, when there was a Jewish court that was ratified by Moses, the court would establish when the new month began, and that was established by witnesses coming to the court. The witnesses saying, "We saw the new month." The court would cross-examine the witnesses, and whether if the witnesses' words were found to be accurate, then the court would say, "Okay, this is the first day of the new month." And of course, it's very important to know what day of the new month is, because all the holidays, Yom Kippur. When is Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur is the 10th day of the month. When's day 1? So the Jewish court, if they are in that line directly from Moses, one generation to the next, only then can they make that a decision. However, if there's been a break in the chain, they can't do it. And today, Jewish courts do not establish the date of the new month. Instead, it's established.
How Los Angeles works?
It's by in Los Angeles, and the entire Jewish world follows the calendar that Hillel wrote, the system that Hillel wrote.
I'm talking about the ring, the door.
Oh yeah.
Not in Israel. So when I come here, it's like, what's going on here?
Okay, so in Israel and the whole world, they follow the calendar. That's why it's important to have this. It's included also in the commandment of the Torah. You should establish judges. How do you establish judges? The sages of the previous generation have to empower the sages of the next generation. That's how. Shalom Aleichem. You made just in time. Have a seat. It's kosher today. Welcome. Good to see you, David. Chaim. So the Jewish court is commanded by the Torah to. The Jewish court is commanded by the Torah to pass the torch to the next generation. They have to. It's a mitzvah. Just like it's a mitzvah to teach Torah to someone, the Torah says you should teach the Torah to your children. Actually, one father was once told by the Rebbe that the Talmud is very specific about who should be the teacher. The Talmud says, when the Torah says teach the Torah to your children, the Talmud comments and says it doesn't mean literally teach Torah to your children. It means teach Torah to your students. Why doesn't it mean literally? The literal translation is your children, but the Talmud says no, it means your students. Your children too, if they're your students. But why doesn't it mean? Why did Talmud choose to extract the verse from the simple translation? It says it very clear: teach Torah to your children, and yes, you have obligation to teach your children. But the Talmud says it means teach your students. And I said because parents are often bad teachers for two reasons. Reason number one is a father. That's beyond my pay grade. I don't know. Anyone have any advice over here?
Decorative, or do we get any free?
Find a way.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm sorry.
But Israelis are smart. Here, you figure it out.
You guessed the right guy. So anyway, okay. Guys, let's focus. Fathers can be lousy teachers because of two reasons. Fathers, they expect and demand a lot from their children, and they also are heavy-handed. I don't mean heavy-handed; they're violent. I mean that they expect a lot. Parents expect a lot. Fathers expect a lot, and they are not just they expect a lot. They're very strong about it. They're very strong about what they expect. So this is a mitzvah that parents have. That the Jewish courts have to pass the torch and establish the next generation of courts. The Nazis in Mach Shemam understood very well the centricity of Jewish leadership, and the Nazis came to various towns. They would go directly to the rabbinate, and even before it was dangerous for Jews to walk the streets, the very first people the Nazis would take with the rabbis, they knew these are their leaders, and break the leaders, then they'll be able to get rid of everybody else. This is the strength of the Jewish people. So the Talmud says a fascinating story about how important it is. To have leadership transmit rabbinic authority to the next generation. The Talmud says there was a tzaddik named Yehuda ben Bava. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava was a real. He was carrying the torch from many generations of Torah leadership, and the Romans made a decree in his time that no one could give smicha anymore. You could not appoint anyone to be a rabbi. And the Romans further decreed that time of the Romans and the Second Temple. And the Romans said if anyone would dare appoint another rabbi as a rabbi, the one who appoints him will be killed, the one who is appointed will be killed, the city in which this happens will be destroyed, and the borders of the city will also be dismantled, so that this city is no longer protected. So it was a really difficult situation. If you want to a city a scenario where the Romans discovered someone doing this process of administering rabbinic authority, it really messed stuff up. But Yehuda ben Bava was not to be discouraged, and he found a way. He went between two mountains, and these two mountains also were between two large metropolis, two large cities. And between these two cities, he took 5 sages, and he gave them halachic authority to carry the torch from the generation before him to the next generation. They will be the real rabbis in an unbroken chain since Moses. However, they say, I'm really good at keeping a secret. I just told the one big mouth. So the Romans discovered this, and the Romans came. And the rabbi said everyone should run away, and they're like, Rabbi, we don't want to leave you. He says, I'm an old man, you won't be able to carry me anyways, and anyways I'm a Evan in lehivchen, I'm a stone that no one's interested in. Guys, just run. And as soon as he finished his sentence, 300 spears pierced him like a sieve, and Yehuda ben Bava was killed. And among the 5 sages that he gave this ordination to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Rabbi Meir, some say Rabbi Nechemia. So this Rabbi Akiva was one of them. Could be, I don't remember. So this went on from one generation to the next, but eventually it stopped. And the question is, How did it stop? How did it stop, and why did it stop? So we'll get there. We'll discuss that in a minute. But let's discuss a fascinating story that happened many, many years later. We all know that in 1492, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain made a auto da fe. They made an excommunication of the Jewish people from Spain. They made an expulsion, rather, of Jewish communities from Spain, and many Jews posed as Christians to protect themselves from the Inquisition. Many Jews left Spain. Many Jews stayed for several years in Spain posing as Christians, and then they wanted to rejoin the Jewish community. A lot of Spanish Jews moved from Spain to Tzfas. In 1538, there were a large group of Spanish Jews who wanted to become reabsorbed in the Jewish community after posing as Christians for many years. And the problem is that in order to really rectify their mistakes, the Talmud talks about various things need to be done that could only be done by a Jewish court. And therefore, when they came to Tzfas, Rab Yaakov Beirav, Mari Beirav, he saw there's a problem here. They want to be reabsorbed among the Jewish people, but they can't be fully until they have the various kinds of atonement. Malchus, and they violated egregious sins, and they want to be absorbed. They want something. They want a Jewish court to give them what they need to be reabsorbed. The Jewish court, there's no Jewish court. So what should they do? So in 1538, Rabbi Yaakov Beirav, he based his ruling upon the words of Maimonides, who says that if there is, Maimonides already is living in a time when there was no smicha anymore. So Maimonides says, although there is no smicha, although there is no tradition from one generation to the next going back to Moses, however, if all the sages of Israel agree, says Maimonides, that there should be someone appointed as a rabbi, that person has the same status as someone appointed by Moses. That's what Maimonides says. So therefore, Rabbi Yaakov Beirav, he got together 25 sages. He got the all-star team together. He got, among the sages he gathered together in Tzfas was the Beis Yosef, the author of the Code of Jewish Law, and many other sages. And he said, okay, we are reinstituting the smicha. There's now a new appointment of all these 25 rabbis. We are all the sages of Israel. At that time in Israel, Tzfas was the highest populated city.
More than Jerusalem?
Way more than Jerusalem. Jerusalem had about 1,500 Jews, and in Tzfas it was more like 15,000. Wow. So there was a lot of Jews there, and they were their leading rabbis, and so therefore they were able to reabsorb those Jews who had thought they could no hope for them. They were able to reabsorb them and give the various kinds of atonement that is discussed in the Talmud, because they were considered a real court. This all was very good. There was just a problem. The problem was it all the sages of Israel? Someone once wrote to the Rebbe that, when we need to for Mashiach to come, we know all the rabbis to get together, and all the rabbis to get together, and all work together, and then Mashiach will come. And the Rebbe responded, not saying the exact words, but more like something to the effect of, in order for all the rabbis to get together, they need Mashiach. That would be a sign of Mashiach. So there was another rabbi who disagreed with the whole process. He said this is not correct, this is not right. His name was Rabbi Levi ben Chaviv. Rabbi Levi ben Chaviv said this was not a correct move. I'm living over here in Jerusalem. They actually sent a message to Levi ben Chaviv. Said, hey, we want you to join us. We want you also to be part of the group of this court that is now established. Join us. But Rabbi Levi ben Chaviv disagreed. He says this ruling of Maimonides does not apply here, because you don't have everybody. And there's other reasons, and so he disagreed. But this court was established. This court gave smicha to the Alshich, Moshe Alshich, and gave smicha also to Chaim Vital. The Beis Yosef he wrote a book, it's really fascinating. He wrote a book based upon teachings he received from an angel. An angel would visit him, and he wrote down the teachings of the angel. And the angel said to him that because of your sacrifice for this process, you are going to be able to finish the code of Jewish law, and you are you're going to be able to make the Shulchan Aruch because you're sacrificed for this for the smicha. It's an important thing. But how did it stop then? How did it stop? These sages didn't continue to go around and say that they were indeed appointed as with this distinction. They didn't consider themselves this distinction. As we see, that the Beis Yosef in the Code of Jewish Law doesn't mention this. The Beis Yosef says, since today there is no concept of smicha, there is no concept of this unbroken chain going back to Moses. We don't have it anymore. Therefore, the law is like this, the law is like that. But what about himself? He himself was given the smicha by all these sages getting together. Why is he not? Why?
It was like a participatory thing.
He was participating. He was part of it, and yet he doesn't. In the Code of Jewish Law, he so to speak recuses himself from the rabbinate, from this level of rabbinate, and he says, "Oh well, we don't have this nowadays." He himself had it. What happened? Why did it stop? How did it stop before the time of the Beis Yosef, and why did the Beis Yosef and these sages continue? So, basically, the idea is like this. The traditional way of answering this question is Gzeras HaMalchus. Most answer this question, they say, just like in the time of Yehuda ben Bava, the Romans didn't like this. They didn't like the authority the Jewish people were giving to their rabbis. They didn't like it. So in other generations as well, there was probably this issue, and that's how many answer this. But the Rebbe doesn't subscribe to this answer because we see what's really important to Jewish people. See what's really important. So Yehuda ben Bava sacrificed himself for this. And it's not so difficult to do this privately. And every sage is commanded to share with others. So there must have been a way for some people to continue the tradition. How come it stopped?
Over how many years? Like 1,000 years or so?
When did it stop? It's part of the question. When did it stop? How did it stop?
Yeah.
There is a letter written by one of the Goinim, Rabbi Eviatar, from the year 1094, and he writes in his time how he administered the rabbinate to the next generation. So there was clearly in time of the Goinim, before the Rishonim, there are different titles for the various sages in different times of history. There's those who wrote the Mishnah called the Tanoim, the Talmud Amoraim, and there are the Goinim and the Rishonim, the Achreinim. So basically, in the year 1094, there's still a concept of smicha. So the bottom line is, here's the answer. The answer is, why didn't the Arizal, why didn't they continue with this? They didn't continue with it in their times, but with this, and give themselves this distinction. They consider the opinion of Malbach. They didn't want there to be an argument. They wanted to be a disagreement. And peace is so important that they decided to forego on this great initiative that they thought was so important and had many, many benefits, because they didn't want there to be dissension, disagreement. And that's also how it stopped originally. When the Jewish people were exiled from the land of Israel, and there was no established court in one specific location, how would you know if a sage was given this distinction of being indeed in the golden chain of those appointed by the Jewish court? How would you even know? There's no way you would know. The guy would have to say, hi, I'm the guy. I mean, you wouldn't be able to check his Facebook, his Instagram. You wouldn't be able to check his baseball card. How would you know? The guy would come and say, I am a rabbi, and my teacher was a student of Moses, an unbroken chain, and therefore I can I can administer halachic disputes, and everyone pay attention. What would happen in that scenario? You'd have some guys say, yeah, it's true. Some guys would say, no, it's not true. And there'd be a lot of arguments. And because of the arguments, although it was possible if all that was needed was for one person to take the other person, it could have happened. But the reason why it did not happen was because that's not all that was needed. Beyond the actual testing the next generation and giving them this gushpanka, giving them this halachic mandate that they are qualified, you needed to have a solid body of a Jewish court that was in one location, so for there to be a widespread acknowledgement of who indeed who has it and who doesn't have it. Because there was no central Jewish court, It became harder to follow, harder to ratify who is and who isn't, and therefore it was stopped because it became it couldn't be managed anymore. People all would bring dissension, and that's the Beis Yosef didn't give himself this title, although he did have this, according to Maimonides, according to his understanding of Maimonides, he did have the status of a rabbi from Moses, but he didn't use it because of arguments. We find the Rebbe who was outspoken on many issues and didn't consider the Maimonides says the truth is something that always remains the way it is. If 1,000 people believe in something, it doesn't become more true. If one person believes in something, it doesn't make it become less true. And the Rebbe spoke always only the truth. But the Rebbe one time spoke about the prayers that are recited for rain in regions which are different to Israel. Should people in South Africa, should they pray a different system based upon their seasons in their country? They once mentioned that there is there's room to say that they should go according to their seasons. The opposite. But right after that, so some smart guy they walk into the synagogues in South Africa, and they made a whole tumult. And the Rebbe basically very clearly said, I didn't want people to go and to make arguments, and that's not the goal. That's a real problem. Whether this prayer or that prayer, I don't know exactly what the Rebbe's original stance, or if it changed, I don't know the details exactly, but the Rebbe definitely said that this is not the way to go, for sure. You should not change the tradition of Jews. Bottom line, Mashiach is coming, and Mashiach comes, is going to be a Jewish court. How will the Jewish court return? How will there again be a Jewish court? Where will it come from? And so there are various answers given. The Radvaz says that when Mashiach comes, all the rabbis will get together and they will establish a court. That's what Radvaz says. There was a tzaddik. Various. The Medrash says that there will be a Jewish court when Mashiach comes. There's a Medrash that says that the Jewish court will return to Tveria first. There's a very interesting answer. Rabbi Yisrael Shklov, who was a leading student of the Vilna Gaon, he says, many important halachic works, he says a very fascinating answer. He says, the way it works is very simple. When Mashiach comes, who's going to herald the coming of Mashiach? Elijah the prophet. Elijah the prophet has halachic. He led a Jewish court, and he received smicha from generation before him in an unbroken chain to Moses. Since Elijah will return, therefore there will be an easy way to reestablish a Jewish court. But here's what's pertinent to us. We see from all of this that there's a way to empower someone that can empower someone else. This week's Torah portion is called Ba'aleischa. Ba'aleischa means when you rise. And it's actually not talking about jumping up and down, it's talking about lighting the menorah. And the Torah classifies lighting the menorah as rising. The reason is, Rashi says, it wasn't sufficient to light the menorah. When the Kohen Gadol, when the high priest will light the menorah, you have to make sure the fire would rise on its own. And so too, when you educate someone, the Rebbe says the true sign of an educator is that the one who is educated, the student, can rise on his own. So practically what that means is that not only do you tell your children to give tzedakah, not only do you tell your children to pray, not only do you tell your children to study Torah, you give them their own Torah books, you give them their own sitters, you give them their own charity boxes. You want it to become their own. And so to yourself, it's not only that you study Torah when you have a chance, but you set yourself up that your environment is the one that invites you to study Torah. You put Torah books in your office. I know a friend of mine who puts his tefillin on his keyboard. Because that way, before he gets to his work, he has to put on tefillin before he opens the keyboard. Setting your environment up in a way that invites you and wants you to study the Torah and do a mitzvah. Putting a siddur, create an environment, a tzedakah box. The Rebbe more than once spoke about how in the kitchens there should be a tzedakah box affixed to the wall. The environment should create in a way that it invites you to a mitzvah. And this is something that's pertinent to ourselves in the way that we create our environments, in our cars, in our homes, and the way we empower our students, the way we empower our children, that they should have, not just they should study the Torah, not just they should do mitzvahs, not just they should pray, not just they should give charity, but they should be able to carry the torch to the next generation, to give it to them in a way that you're looking at them in a way that they are grandfathers, not just grandchildren, but grandfathers of the next generation. And when that approach is really shall have us the fire rising on its own, and this is this is very consonant with the bracha that we're asking for. The bracha coming Mashiach, when Hashem will return the judges, return the leaders of the Jewish people in the same status as those who were given smicha from Moshe Rabbeinu. L'chaim, l'chaim, l'chaim.